So I thought just to get us going, I just give you one little Bible piece that ties off the shame stuff. So Matthew 1 is, anybody know? It's one of the most boring parts of the Bible. Genealogy of Jesus. So it starts at Abraham and then goes down from there. So if you look into the genealogy of Jesus from the Jewish culture and from a shame-based complex trauma, it opens up to these amazing things. So let me just say this first. About 20 years ago, I read a book by a Bible scholar, but they were raised in Lebanon. And what they did in this book was he went through all the parables of Jesus and stories of the New Testament. And he said, you have to understand, to really understand the Bible, that the culture of the world at that time that Jesus grew up in was a shame-based culture. So everything was about honor and that. So just for example, the story of the prodigal son, that was a shame-based story. So in that culture, old men had a lot of rules. So old men were not allowed to run. They only walked because running was considered undignified and for the immature. And so what does the father do when he sees his son? He runs. And then when your son has dishonored you, the right response in that culture is that in order to regain your honor, you have to shun your son. You can have absolutely nothing to do with him. If you were to welcome him back, you would be dishonoring yourself. And so the fact that the father ran, hugged his son in public, and kissed him was to the Eastern mind awful. Who would ever do that when your son has dishonored you so much? So the son dishonoring him went to a strange land, wasted all his money. When he said, give me my inheritance now before you die, what he was really saying to his dad was, I wish you were dead. So let's get this over with. Give me my money. And he went to a foreign land. And basically the point of the story is he did everything his father was against. So riotous living. Then he worked with pigs, which to a Jewish mind was you just never did. So the son did everything his father was against. And so for his father to hug him and kiss him in public and throw a big party was the ultimate dishonoring yourself. And so Jesus' point was the Jewish people operate by a shame-based society, but God doesn't. And God doesn't care about what people think, he cares about love. And so that's the whole basis of that. Okay, so back to the genealogy. Genealogies in Israel only put the father's names. So it was Abraham begot Isaac, who begot Jacob, and it goes by father to father to father to father. So what stands out, and so Matthew, the gospel, was written to Jewish people. And so what stands out is he mentions 5 women. Anybody know who those first woman was?
Rahab? No, Ruth.
Tamar first.
Tamar, she got
And what happened with Tamar?
brother,
She slept with her other
was raised.
Exactly. So she dressed like a prostitute in order to lure her father-in-law in. So the backstory to that is the father-in-law, Judah, had 3 sons. And so she married the first one, he died. She married the second one, which was the Levirate law. He died. And so the father said, whoever marries this woman seems to die, so I'm not giving her my 3rd son. So she says, go away for a while because the son's too young, and when he's older I'll call you, which he never did. And so she had to act the widow, lived with the black robes on, and so she realized she had been duped and she had been cheated out of having a man to provide for her, so she dressed like the prostitute in order to get Judah to come in. And so the whole point of that story is Tamar, the Jews go, of all women, why are you mentioning her? She's immoral sexually. So that was number 1. Number 2,
She's in the genealogy of Jesus.
Yeah, Matthew 1. So the second woman,
Rahab.
Rahab. And what was Rahab?
Prostitute.
Professional prostitute. Okay, third, Ruth. And what was Ruth, where was she from?
Moabite.
And do you know how the Moabites started? The tribe, the country of Moab? So Lot, after his wife was turned to a pillar of salt, Lot and his two daughters went away. And his two daughters realized they had no husbands, no man, and they had to hide. So the daughters conspired to get their dad drunk, and then they'd take turns sleeping with him so they could both get pregnant. So it was an incestuous relationship. So one of the daughters had a son named Moab. And so God had said the Moabites become a cursed people because of how they started. So Ruth comes out of a cursed people. Okay, fourth woman, Bathsheba, had the affair with David. So do you see? And then the fifth woman is Mary. So what do you think Matthew is trying to tell these Jewish people by putting those four women before the married one into the genealogy? Because it would have been horrifying for any Jew to read that genealogy. He's saying God is all about grace. He chooses messed up people. And then just to drive it home, so the genealogy is broken into 3 parts. Each one has 14 names. And that would just be, in a culture you didn't have books, there was just a scroll at the synagogue. It was a memorization tool. So you would be able to remember, okay, I gotta get 14 names, I gotta get 14 names. So there's actually more than 14 generations in all of them, but he just picks 14. Okay? So if you look at the first one, it's Abraham. I think it goes down to David. So that's Israel at its prime. The next 14 is Israel as it falls apart and goes into captivity. And the last 14 are Israel in the 400 silent years when God sent no prophets or anything. So what you see in the 3 stages is each one Israel gets lower and lower and lower. And so Matthew says it's out of the lowest point Jesus came. So it's a genealogy of grace. And it would have blown the Jewish people away because they believed that God would hate those people. God would never use those kind of people. They had sinned too badly. And Matthew is redefining the true God. Any questions on that one? Okay, I'll give you one more. Some people are still waking up. So John 14. Anybody remember how it starts? Jesus is having his final Passover with his disciples before he dies. And he says, "Let not your hearts be troubled. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it weren't so, I would have told you, and I'm going to go and prepare a place for you, and when I'm done, I'm going to come back and make you my own." Everybody remember that now? Mm-hmm. John 14. What you don't realize is that that's how a boy proposed to a girl. So let me explain that. So, arranged marriages. So the 2 dads would meet to make sure the children were from good families. The son would be able to provide for the daughter, and that had good character, etc., etc. And so after they decided, then they picked the dowry price. So anything from a bag of gold to a sick goat, whatever they felt the girl was worth. And then they would set up the next stage. So what would happen is the guy and the girl would get together, and the guy would say, "This is who I am, this is my career, this is my character, this is my commitment to provide for you, to love you, to have children with you, etc." And then he'd take a glass of wine, and he'd put it to her, and if she drank from it, she was saying, "I accept your marriage proposal." So the whole way of kind of receiving the diamond ring was a glass of wine offered to her. Her taking a drink was accepting the proposal of marriage, and then the guy would go away and prepare a house for her. Now it says, in my father's house are many rooms. So what's interesting, how many of you have been to Israel or the Mideast? So flat roofs, but if you were to go there, what you see out of the roofs is a whole bunch of rebar just sticking up. And so what that is when the boys get married, or they come and they add a room to the house. And then they live in the house, and they have a common cooking area for all the people in the family that live there. So that's what was happening. The boy saying, I'm going to go away. And it usually was about a year to build this house for his bride. Then he would come back, pick her up, have the marriage ceremony, and then take her to his father's house. So we're going to cover different pieces of that a bit later. But what happened when Jesus was having the Passover? He took bread and broke it and said, this is my body. Took a cup of wine, and he said, take it and drink. And then he said, in my Father's house are many rooms. You see, he's proposing. Now what's fascinating to me about that is what just happened before the Passover amongst the disciples.
Were they fighting this way?
Yeah.
Exactly. They act like total jerks. Children.
Total human.
Yeah, and so what Jesus is saying is, even though you guys are really kind of all about yourself and messed up and ego-driven, and you really don't understand humility and love very well, I still want to marry you. And so that then, as you go to the book of Revelation, it talks about him coming back for the bride. So we become referred to as the bride. And an interesting piece around that, hey, now I'm getting myself wound up here.
No,
The Ten Commandments. Mount Sinai, just come out of Egypt with complex trauma. What's fascinating is the whole ceremony of the Ten Commandments is a wedding ceremony in a Jewish mind. So a Jewish mind, you had a canopy. And the bride and groom stood under the canopy. And what the writer in Exodus 19 and 20 tells us is that God created a canopy over the mount. And that they stood under a canopy. And then they would have the marriage contract. So how many tablets of stone were there? 2. And we tend to think that there's the first 5 commandments on tablet 1, second 5 on tablet 2. Not so. In a marriage ceremony, you had 2 contracts. One to the bride, one to the groom. And so all of the agreements were put on a contract, 2 contracts, and given to the bride and the groom. And so that's what the 2 tablets were. One's for God, one's for Israel. But on the tablet was the commitment of love. So guess what the 10 Commandments are? A marriage commitment. I am committing myself to have no other gods before you. You're going to be the love of my life, my first priority. I will not cheat on you. I will be faithful to you. I will forgive you and respect you. You see that? So it's the love commitment are the 10 Commandments. Now that takes the whole perception of the 10 Commandments and puts it in the right light. They're not a list of don'ts. Don't do this, don't do this. They're a list of love. And they're part of a marriage. So what you begin to realize in the Bible is Passover, Mount Sinai, as God began kind of 2 new segments of history, he is saying, I am so committed to you, I want to marry you, even though you're very messed up. So it's very much a grace wedding. So one final thing around that. In the old King James, there was, so when Moses went up the mountain and God hid him in the cleft of the rock and then revealed himself, and he said, I am the God, and then he defined himself. The main thing he uses to identify himself is a word that we translate loving kindness. And it's always been a challenge to get the English word to match what the Hebrew word is really saying. And basically what it is saying is, that word loving kindness is the love of a husband and wife. It is the love of commitment to a set of vows. And so what God is saying to Israel by saying, I am marked by loving kindness, is that this love that I have that is unconditional, it is based on a commitment of life. I am totally committed to you, and that means I will always have your best in mind. That means I will be marked by grace, mercy, forgiveness, all of those other things. So when it gets to the core, to the essence of who God is, He's a God of a covenant of love. And that marks all of His stuff. So there you go. So what I find fascinating in my own life is we read the Bible through 21st century eyes. And when I start to understand Jewish culture, history, and then the whole Bible starts to open up in this beautiful way, that and stuff that we never would have seen. Good morning, Mike.
Morning.
Don't see him here.
So, before we go into our topic, we've had, for most of you sharing with me, a fairly heavy week. So, people having nightmares, people having flashbacks, some people having body pain that's come with all of that. So I just wanted to begin with anybody that wants to talk about that a little bit, have some questions around some of that. I say this to clients all the time. My heart hurts when I see clients in pain, but it's also happy at the same time. Because I know there's something going on that potentially is going to be really good. But it really sucks to watch people go through some of the healing journey. I'll start. Can I tell you one more story? So, Peter's greatest failure was denying the Lord. Okay? So, if you look at just what was happening in Peter's life before he denied the Lord, he was one of the three kind of special disciples. So Peter, James, and John. Jesus did special things with them. Jesus changed his name to Peter from Cephas. So Cephas is a pebble. Peter's a rock. And then he gave him the keys of the kingdom and said, on this rock I'll build my church. So Peter had this growing sense that God's got a special plan for him. And so on the night of the Passover, Jesus said, all of you will forsake me. And what did Peter say?
No.
Even if everybody does, I won't. And what he was saying is, my love is greater than everybody else's. My commitment to you is greater than everybody else's. I'm in a league of my own. And so then after that, he denied the Lord 3 times. So remember, what was the geographical setting of that denial? Those 3 months. What was happening in this physical environment?
They were in Jerusalem.
People were accusing, aren't you the one?
Okay, so you got asked 3 times. I'm pretty sure you were a follower of his. Your accent is not from around here. I saw you earlier with him. And there was a fire that he was warming himself around. Okay? So after he's done his 3 denials, 2 very important things happen. Anybody remember what they are?
He made contact with Jesus in the rooster.
So exactly. So Jesus is moving from one room to the other just at that moment in time, and we're told that they made eye contact. And then the rooster crows, and then it says he went out and he wept bitterly. He just guttural, weeping because he had failed so much. So the one thing he said he would never do, that he was better than everybody, he proved now to be worse than everybody. So the depth of his failure. So jump ahead just a couple weeks, and they've gone back to fishing, and Jesus comes along on the shore, and what does he do? He builds a fire. You gotta remember, he's gonna recreate the scene of the denial. And he asked 3 questions, the same question 3 times. Isn't that right? Okay? So he's saying, Peter, let's go back to that night. So the other piece you have to understand is he uses 2 different words for love. So agape, everybody know what agape is? That's God love, the highest form of love. And then phileo, which is brother love, Philadelphia, city of brotherly love. I like you. So question 1, Peter, do you agape me? And what does Peter say in response? I phileo you. And basically, there's a humility now that says, I can no longer claim that I love you with perfect love. All I can honestly say now is, I really like you. So there's a humility. Jesus asks him again, same response. Then the third question, here's what happens. Jesus says, Peter, do you phileo me? He changes from agape in his question to phileo. So he says, Peter, do you even like me? And Peter says, God, you know my heart. You know all things. Yes, I think I love you. Or I like you. And so he's brought around the thing to the same 3 questions that he said he denied. And so then the question is, how did then God respond to Peter? He said, Peter, before you're going to be any use to me, you got to be in the doghouse for 10 years. He says, feed my sheep. And so what I have found with people is sometimes those great failures, or that what we feel is a failure, that brings up all the shame and old messages, because I think those are all happening with Peter. There's lots of evidence of that. And God is saying, that failure will now make you ready for service. So follow what happens. Do you know who Peter, the main person that Peter mentored? It was Mark. And what had happened with Mark when he had gone on a missionary journey with Paul? He's the one that bailed on Paul. And then, when Paul was going on the next missionary journey, Paul and Barnabas had a big fight, and Paul says, I'm not taking that kid. So guess who ended up taking him? Peter. Why? Because he understood failure. And he understood failure is not final. And so he then became the leader of basically the church throughout Israel and even into the Gentile world. And so when it came to his death, does anybody know how Peter died? Crucified upside down. So they wanted to crucify him, and he says, you know what? I'm not worthy of dying like my master died. Please turn me upside down. So there was a humility and a faithfulness that developed out of that greatest failure. And so that's, to me, what I have seen in many, many people. Sometimes before God's ready to use us on a bigger platform, he takes us first through failure and deep pain. So your greatest, I love going through the Bible to look at Moses. Okay, so we're going to do this and have a break. God wants Moses to lead his people out of slavery. Moses at age 40 thinks he's ready for the job, and he goes and he does his thing and kills one of the slave masters. And then before he was ready, what did he have to do?
Wander in the desert.
For 40 years. So God said, you know what? I'm going to have you, as part of your job in serving me, is taking my people for 40 years. So before you're ready, you got to have 40 years with sheep. So that you begin to know the desert. You begin to know limbic brain creatures. That's going to be my university for you. Okay? David, what was his preparation?
Well, being pursued constantly by Saul.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So David was anointed at 16, and he becomes king at 30. Do you realize he lived for 10 years in caves in the desert, running from Saul? And then what did God do when he's in the desert? He's run for his life to a cave. Then we're told that 600 people showed up and said, David, Saul wants to kill us too. He's a crazy guy. Could we stay with you? Can you imagine how annoying that would be? You're hurting yourself and you're trying to keep safe. Now you got 600 people plus their kids. They keep quiet at night to stay hiding. And then they're all broken people, so they're really annoying because they bicker and complain. Guess where David learned how to be king?
In the caves.
Managing those people. And what else happened with that? He developed a heart for broken people.
Look, he could have killed Saul in the cave
Exactly.
there, and he had that moment, everyone's like, yeah, yeah, but he
Exactly.
was like, no, he knew God would know all.
Yeah. So if you look at David's 60 bodyguards, so again, the boring part of the Bible, it talks about his 60 men. They were all in the cave with him. So they were all the ones running for their life as well.
Incredible men.
Yeah.
People don't understand it. They have no idea. Because when they were in that battle, and he asked for water, they went through.
Exactly.
They went through it. People can't come
Yeah.
see that.
So Moses training 40 years, David's training 10 years in very painful, harsh, difficult places. Anybody know how long Paul was trained?
14.
No, about 3 years in the desert.
83, but I thought he was 14. He did such a stick to lose.
Yeah. So so notice the common ingredient in all three of those preparations, they were all in a desert.
I guess I have to go to Egypt.
So, for all of you, I think the healing from complex trauma, all the pain of the past, all the pain of that, God wants to turn it into a training. So let me give you one more piece on that. When you begin to look at the people God chose, they're not just usually broken people, they're usually very odd ducks. So if you were to meet John the Baptist, anybody want to describe John the Baptist?
A very odd duck.
Come on,
So-
he
Probably
ate
dread
wild
locks
locusts and
and-
honey.
Wearing
He dressed
Like
like
camel
nobody
hair.
else.
Okay, why would you dress with camel hair? It's a very important point.
He must have looked like a caveman.
Okay,
Just to be different, no.
I think
I don't
it's
know.
protecting
camel hair doesn't wear out. So you don't have to get a new pair of jeans every year because they've worn out. Camel hair you can wear the rest of your life. So John the Baptist basically had one outfit that he wore every day. I can't imagine the deal and all of that. So the point of John the Baptist was he was a Nazarite vow from birth. So a Nazarite vow was that you wouldn't touch alcohol, cut your hair, and what was the third one? Dead. Yeah. But if he lived in a desert, ate locusts, dressed weird, had long hair. And so if you begin to go through the Bible and look at the people God chose to lead, they were weird guys. So that's gives me a
Not
lot
people,
of
not in
confidence.
the people pleasing category, eh?
Oh.
Not in the people pleasing category.
Exactly. Okay, I just have one final thing before break. Okay, Paul in 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians says God has taken this treasure and put it into jars of clay. So what you have to understand culturally about that is, so you have a lantern or kind of a torch, and if you're gonna go outside and it's windy, you'd put a jar of clay over top of it, but that would make it all black, because it would block all the light. So what was the kind of jar you would use to let the light out? A cracked pot. So God uses cracked pots, is what Paul's saying. Because then his glory gets seen that wouldn't get seen in an all put together person. That would hide. So people look at what happens with us and they go, well, that can't be just that person. They're too much of a cracked pot. For that to be effective, that's got to be a God thing. Okay, break time. His most important stuff first. So the first words out of his mouth are, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are they that mourn, blessed are the meek, blessed are they hunger and thirst after righteousness. Okay? So let me just sorry for the squeak. Okay, what I want you to start with is, blessed are the poor in spirit. in the Greek language, there are 3 words for poor, and it's really helpful to understand that. So the first would be a family that is mortgage poor. So they still have a house, they still have a car, they can eat fairly well, but they just don't have any money left over by the time to pay the mortgage and all of that. So that's not the word Jesus used. Second one is people that are so poor, all they can afford is craft dinner and hot dogs. So they have a place, but like don't have a lot of money at all. That's not the word Jesus uses. The third word that Jesus uses is bankrupt. They have 0 resources. So they can't even buy craft dinner. So in many ways, it's your street people. Okay? So what he is basically saying with a bankrupt poor is you are left to get your needs met through begging. Because that's the only thing you can do. So you're begging poor. So what he says is the happiest, so the word blessed is happy, or content, or satisfied. So what is significant to me with that is when it describes God in 1 Timothy, it says God is the blessed God. And what it means is God is never discontent. He is totally satisfied all the time. So what you see here then is Jesus is saying, I'm going to give you God's recipe for happiness. I'm going to give you God's recipe for being content and satisfied. So it starts with being begging poor. And you go, that sounds like a recipe for misery, not a recipe for happiness. But every addict understands poor in spirit, because basically you get to a point where you say, God, I have no resources to live right. My dark side is so big and so powerful that I can't even overcome it on my own anymore. Unless you help me, I am done. And so that's that desperate awareness of how weak and vulnerable you are. So that's the starting point. So guess what, if you go to the steps, what is step 1? What did we admit? Powerless over drugs and alcohol, and our lives become unmanageable. Realize that Bill W. based the 12 steps on the Beatitudes? So, second word for mourn. Repentance. So there's a distinction that is so important, and every addict will get it. What's the difference between remorse and repentance?
Feeling sorry but not moving that extra step.
Exactly. So every addict feels remorse. Look what I'm doing to my kids, I feel so guilty, they cry, but they don't change their life. So the word repentant means a 180-degree turn. So I was going this way, I'm not only remorseful for that, I am going the other way. But what also is happening in remorse is I'm owning my failure.
Oh, and repenting?
Repent, that's 180-degree turn.
Yeah, but in the remorse, were you saying in the
Oh.
remorse you were?
Yeah, so in remorse, I'm saying I am poor in spirit because of the decisions I've made. So I'm owning my stuff. I'm not blaming anybody, I'm not trying to minimize it. I am looking at it honestly, and it breaks my heart. So there's just a devastating brokenness. Now another important distinction, do you know what it means to be broken in will versus broken in spirit? So broken in will, if you're training your dog, if they're broken in will, they obey. If they're broken in spirit, they cower. So broken in spirit is you abuse the dog, you beat it down, you mistreat it until it just takes its toll and the dog cowers. That's a broken spirit. A broken will is repentance, where you have a happy dog because he's following his master and obeying. So complex trauma breaks the spirit. God wants us with broken wills. So that's an important shift, but it's a tough shift. Because When your spirit's been broken, you think the only solution is to never let anybody have my will, because they will just abuse me and break me again. So that leads to the third one, the old word for meek, and most people, when they hear meek, say meek is weak, right? In the world of that time, the word meek had a very important meaning. So the horse that would win in a race, so the fastest, strongest horse, the horse that would win in a race was called the meekest horse. So there's no weakness there. This is the most powerful. So you go, well, what does that mean? That power in that horse would only make it to the finish line faster than anybody if they obeyed a tiny little jockey sitting on their back. So it meant surrender. You surrender all your power to a little wee jockey on the back. So guess what step 2 and 3 is? Turn my will and my life over to the care of God. Meekness. So they would talk about a meek wind. And what it meant is if wind is not surrendered to a higher power, you get a hurricane, you get a tornado, it does tremendous damage. But you get a wind that's surrendered to a greater power, you get a gentle breeze that is soothing and healing. So the whole point of what Jesus is saying is, you have to get to the place where you say, I can't do it. Then you got to own your stuff and repent, and then you got to surrender. Okay, but you're not quite done yet. Then you got to hunger and thirst after righteousness. And in my mind, that's all the rest of the steps. So hunger and thirst after righteousness basically is I want to get healthy. I want to become like God. I want to change. The word hunger and thirst is an interesting Greek word. So most of us, when let's say you hunger for pumpkin pie, you go and have a piece or two, and then you're quite content now. But that's not the word Jesus uses. He says you hunger and thirst for every piece of pumpkin pie in the world. That's how deep your hunger is. And basically what that means is you're willing to go to any lengths. I want this so badly, I will let anything go that gets in the way of it. I will pursue it with discipline and determination and faithfulness, because this is the answer. I have to have it. And so there's that willing to go to any lengths in order to get that pumpkin pie. Does that make sense? You see how that fits? Mm-hmm. And so what happens in steps 4 to 9 is you do a moral inventory, say what's not righteous in me. And then step 6, you go character defects. Okay, I got all this stuff that's not good in me. Now I have to work at becoming righteous. But it's not just me. I've hurt a lot of people in the process, so I have to try to heal relationships. Step 8 and 9, making amends. So all of that flows out of the Beatitudes. So part of what people in recovery, and this is where I think addiction again can be a blessing, I don't think anything brings people to poor in spirit faster than addiction. Now most people think they just need help to get over the addiction. But what complex trauma does is say, no, I created a dark side, that's the bigger thing, and that's brought me to a place of powerlessness in my life and a mess. So it brings you to that poor in spirit as well when you face it honestly. And then repentance, surrender, and pursuit. Any questions on that? So just a couple more things with this. So what Jesus is saying is, how do you have a relationship with God? Here's how you have a relationship with God. Now, the next piece that I want you to understand is, these are not just poor in spirit one day, mourn one day, meek one day, and then you're become a Christian. All of these are continual attitudes. is what he says. So it's not just that you're poor in spirit one day, you're gonna be poor in spirit for the rest of your life. So that every day you wake up and say, God, I need you. God, you gotta fill me and control me. And that means I gotta surrender. And that means I gotta pursue him. And so Beatitudes are ongoing attitudes that aren't just a one-time thing, they become the things that characterize me. Okay? And then one other thing. Shame, that we talked about on Thursday. What shame says is I don't like me, and so I'll never be happy with just me. So what does shame do to look for happiness? It goes to the external world. It says, if only I had more money, if only I had a better boss, if only I had a different job, if only. And so the whole focus is I can't fix the internal world, I just get a perfect outside world and then I'll get happiness. You know what Jesus is saying? Here's how you fix your internal world. So true happiness doesn't come from circumstances, true happiness comes from an inner world that's at peace. And then it doesn't matter what the circumstances are, you're still full of joy in them because your internal world is fixed. And so it becomes very much the focus on that heals shame because you're beginning to heal that internal world. So that always to me is, I think Jesus had a lot of insight into complex trauma. And so he's really kind of helping us with that. Oh.
Can I just
Yeah.
say something? Like, I find this like mind-blowing because whenever I read the Beatitudes, and I had to memorize it as a little tiny girl, you know, in church, but I always looked at it as so separate. Like,
Yeah.
oh, here's the poor in spirit, here's those that mourn, here's those
Yes.
that are meek, here's those that, you know, and I always looked at it as different people and I could visualize the different groups. Never ever thought that it could be all things in one.
Yeah.
That's interesting. All right, I just wanted to
Oh, that's beautiful.
yeah.
Anything else? So part of what I shared with you on Monday, I think it was the first night, is after my experience of beginning to look at the Bible through the eyes of pain and complex trauma, and that the culture that Jesus lived in was a shame-based culture, and much of his teaching comes out of that shame-based culture, then you begin to realize, wow, this is really the recipe for happiness. This is the recipe for success that was talked about at the gala last night. And so there's nothing here that has anything to do with an external world. You can be rich, poor, whatever, but it's a heart work. Okay? So when I work with a client, guess what I'm looking for? To have a sense of whether they have any chance of success. Are they poor in spirit? Are they mourning? Have they surrendered? And do they really want it badly? And if you don't get those four, they're not going to make it. And so what's important is, I think with that, some clients will go to poor in spirit very quickly. Others, you have to just love on them for a long time before they finally get there. So we can't force them to poor in spirit, only God can create that. But we can love them and have boundaries and all of that. But you just don't have success until people have those first four Beatitudes in place. It becomes absolutely essential. Okay, so let's go to anger. Now, just so you're aware, when I teach the anger, what I can count on when people first take it is I'll say, how many people have anger issues? And maybe one or two will put up their hand. All the others don't think they have anger issues. But what I know by the end of the workshop, they're all going to have anger issues. And some is gonna be directed at me, because I exposed their anger issues. So that's a very common thing. So what I often do at the beginning of the class is I ask some intro questions, so you can do them yourself, okay? Because I want people to begin to just think anger. So scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being nothing at all, to 10 being over the top, how much anger was in your home growing up? Now, you have to qualify that with clients, because most people, when they think of anger, just think of explosive anger. Yelling, throwing, abusive, hitting. So what I'll do with clients is, you might have been in a home where there was no visible anger, but how much anger did you sense? How much did you feel you had to walk on eggshells around dad or mom? And all of a sudden they go, oh, then there was a lot of anger in our home. Because I just pick these vibes up all the time that dad couldn't be talked to right now because of danger, okay? So then the second question, scale of 1 to 10, where would you rate your anger over the last 10 years? So that's, you gotta kind of do the average across that. So for most clients, you will get at least 7 and above. So what they're beginning to realize as clients share is that they all have anger issues. There's something there. So what I ask them then is, how many of you have been angry for as long as you can remember? You just didn't know why. And most of them will put up their hand. So what they're connecting to now is that there's always been this undercurrent of anger in their life. They're not sure why or how it got there, it's just been there. The next thing I ask is, how many of you are afraid of your anger? How many of you have this awareness, if I ever kind of gave into my anger and just went with it, I'm afraid of what I might do. And so there's always the thing to keep it stuffed down or bottled up, because you're afraid of ever letting it out. And so many will relate to that. And then sometimes I ask, how many of you have had a blackout rage? So you've just gone into this anger place and then later you can't remember anything about it. So a blackout rage, and you will get usually 1 or 2 that will have gone through that.
What does that look like exactly?
Anybody?
I've had it, that's happened to me
Okay.
several times.
So symptomology physically, for a lot of people, they begin by getting either tunnel vision, it's black here, or stars here. They're just shaking and vibrating, and then they just lose kind of consciousness. They're still physically conscious, but they lose. So it's like an alcoholic that goes into a blackout drunk. So they don't have any memories after what happened. So the cortisol takes over to such an extent that you are totally in fight mode that you're not even aware of what's going on. So you disassociate, basically. Is that?
Yeah, I don't remember what happened. My dad just picked me up. I guess I don't even remember that. He goes, well, do you know how you got in your bedroom? I'm like, no. And he goes, well, because he never earned the right to be heard in my life, and then he just came down like a ton of bricks, and I guess I just snapped. And I don't remember, but I tried to beat him up.
Yeah.
So, and then it happened another time. My sister was bugging me, like to the point of just exhaustion, and I don't even remember what I did. I
Yeah.
just turned on her,
Yeah.
and she laughed, right? Because she's my bigger sister, so she could kind of handle me, but
Yeah.
I didn't realize what I had done.
Yeah.
So that does really scare me, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's the next question I ask people, is how many of you are afraid to start looking at your anger? Because they're afraid it's gonna open a can of worms they're not gonna be able to control. So what I do is assure people that, like, we're gonna get tools as we deal with this anger, and you can talk about it and have support. And so it's just, like, you're not gonna be all alone in dealing with the anger. And then one other question that I ask is, if you have been triggered, in the last 2 weeks, so you've had an anger episode in the last 2 weeks, scale of 1 to 10, how bad did it get? Everybody got all that?
I just go with that first
So what-
question you
Yeah.
said in regards to your parents.
Yeah.
Is it just based on that, or could it be your siblings?
Siblings as well, yeah, it's in your home environment.
Growing, how much angle is in the home? Okay,
That's a huge part of it, your siblings.
yeah. It
Especially
was
if
more
you're,
my siblings and my parents, so it's like,
especially if you're an older sibling that was a bully or just
Well, I was number
made you do stuff.
What
Yeah.
questions and sides.
even sensing their angles, like not necessarily my anger, sensing the angles
I don't think it's
in them.
Exactly.
So, because I've been told twice, I have a totally different view of my family growing up than the rest of them.
Number 2 was the lever. Your perception is too. Are you afraid of the
And,
lever?
and I have the same perception as they did, and they're all being heavily
We
attention.
have triggers and monsters.
Yeah.
But, I'm not.
But it, so it did affect.
So, okay.
So sometimes I ask this final question, and it kind of depends on what I'm sensing with the group, but it's basically, if you were to take an inventory of the damage you've done through your anger, what would be on that inventory? So I'm cautious in going there because that can just start bringing lots of guilt along with the anger and self-loathing. But it does become a little bit of an important question for some because there's systems in their brain where they try to minimize their anger as being as bad as it is, or to justify it in
So
some
as a
way.
mother, with that kind of, I know that was in me, when my kids would get me to the point where I was
Yeah.
just ready to explode, I would literally run
Yeah.
out the door every time.
Yeah.
That was my way of
Yeah.
coping with it, because I was very afraid of myself and what I may do.
Exactly. So your story to me is an important thing. So many kids have no option when they're young except freeze. They can't fight or flight. Then they get a bit older and flight is their next option. But then when they get into their teens and they're bigger and stronger, many go to fight. And so they bottled anger up for years, but it begins to start coming out. So you can see for many clients a progression between freeze, flight, and fight.
So then, as a parent, I was able to realize, like, I knew that I was capable, but I didn't want to get to the point.
Yeah.
So I knew when I was approaching it, so I would literally run out the door.
Exactly. Just to avoid doing
So,
damage.
yeah, so, but then I've never really dealt with it,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah, and so there, and that's the piece. So
Yeah.
you were trying to
And I'm
solve it
getting
with the.
triggered again,
Exactly.
you know, and so that's just, and, you know, I don't wanna go there.
Yeah, exactly. So you were trying to solve it with the tools you had,
Yeah,
but knowing that that's not really solving anything.
no,
Just-
my daughter actually is wondering, like, why do you always run away from me? Believe me, it's a good thing. But, no,
I'm
not
just
very good
wondering
tool.
if feeling upset is also a kind of anger.
Okay,
I'm not really like angry people,
Okay.
like go yelling or screaming. I just feel upset or I feel uncomfortable.
Okay.
Is that anger?
so let me go to the next piece. So you have an event, okay? But it's not always the event that makes you angry, it's your perception of the event. So for an example, I was raised in a home where if you were making a point, you would wag your finger. Did you tell the story?
No.
Okay.
Same on mine.
Kim was raised in a home where if somebody wagged a finger at you, you were bad. So Kim and I get married, and we're having an argument, and I start wagging my finger to make a point, and she's getting mad at me and hurt and upset. I go, what's going on? You're saying I'm bad. I go, no, I'm not. So her perception of my body language was distorted based on our history. And so that led to, so if you pay attention to me over watching videos and that, I wag my knuckle now. I don't wag my full finger. I got smart.
That's a good compromise.
You wag the pen as well.
Oh, do I? There you go, thank you. Okay,
I was watching it this morning. I
I'll be watching for that from now on.
so what happens now is you have anger. Now, most people from complex trauma see anger as bad. And so in their mind, I shouldn't be feeling this. And so that's why they try to stuff it, run, whatever. And so what is important to understand is anger, like all emotions, is like the lights on your dash. So you get your check engine light on, you don't go dumb light, shut up, you go, oh, it's telling me something's wrong with my engine. And so anger is the check engine light. And it says something's going on underneath here that you better look at. The same as grief, the same as loneliness. All of them are lights on the dashboard saying pay attention to something's happening down below that you need to give attention to.
I've also heard that anger is really the flip side of fear.
We're gonna, yeah, it's one of the main causes.
Right.
And we're gonna develop that because it's such an important piece.
What other emotion did you say, like that the anger,
Grief.
the lonely, oh, grief.
Yeah. Depression, all of those. So when we get to our week on emotions, it's to realize that emotions were given to us by God to give us or alert us to what's going on inside of us. So that if it's a negative emotion, we can pay attention and fix it. So what then happens is you can respond to that anger in a healthy or an unhealthy way. So there's nothing wrong with being upset and angry. That's not the issue. It's how you respond to being upset and angry that becomes the issue. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Now the problem is in a complex trauma home, lots of anger, always unhealthy responses. So your history says anger's bad and every tool I have is going to hurt somebody. And so that's all you know, and you don't even know there's this other set of tools that can be learned. Okay? Now, any of you taken an anger management course? Okay? I usually ask clients that, and then I go, how much did it help you? You want to realize that most anger management courses don't help complex trauma. Because complex trauma takes anger to a whole different level. And so that's what I want you to be kind of thinking of, is the unique challenges of complex trauma when it comes to anger, okay? So the first thing I want to do is, God actually gave us anger as a very, very good thing. So anger is a release of cortisol that puts us into this powerful adrenaline rush state. Why? Because anger tells us something has violated love. So if somebody lies to you, you're angry. Somebody cheats on you, you're angry. Somebody hurts you, you're angry. Somebody disrespects you, you're angry. See what I'm saying? So what, basically you go back to our road, our narrow road with two guardrails, two boundaries. So whenever anybody steps outside of the healthy or the love, the road, and they step into unhealthy, they tell a lie, they disrespect me, we get angry so that we'll say this has to get fixed. If we continue out here, it will damage our relationship, it will damage us. So anger gives us the energy and the motivation to make something healthy again.
I can clean my house when I'm angry like nobody's.
Oh, me too, I hear you. Like China, very interesting, because I remember my mother always doing everything out of anger.
Right.
And so I promised myself that I would never be motivated by anger. And that was a promise I made to myself, but what's happened is I don't do anything. It stops me from being motivated, so I have to, like, yeah, it's a real, I'm struggling, and this is
Okay.
exactly what I'm struggling
Okay.
with.
So I would say there's probably some healthy and unhealthy in Wendy's cleaning the house, but we'll look at that. So let me then, so basically, justice, respect, truth, safety. So if anything violates justice, what are kids famous for saying? That's not fair. Okay? Disrespect, dishonesty, broken promises, and a lack of safety. So what happens then in complex trauma? You live in a world of injustice, disrespect, lies, secrets, and no safety. The kid gets angry. God's design. This isn't right, this is hurting. And how does that kid get responded to? They get punished. So then, they had the right anger, but nothing got resolved. That's what I want you to see. So complex trauma, the child gets the right anger, but has no way of resolving it, and they get punished or told they're bad for being angry. So what then becomes your option?
Bottle it down.
Stuff it down. And you create lava. Make sense? So complex trauma is the creation of lava. Most anger management courses are all about the eruptions of the volcano. Never deal with the lava. And so that's why most complex trauma have been as angry for as long as they can remember, because they've been having to stuff all of this stuff that was a God-given response that they got punished for. They've been stuffing and stuffing and stuffing so they wouldn't get beat up or punished by letting it out. Okay, now the next thing I do with clients is this. Guess what the biggest triggers of eruptions are today? Injustice, disrespect, dishonesty, cheating, danger. So now I am hyper sensitive and alert to anything that is unjust, disrespectful. Make sense?
In the case where a child was between divorced parents, on one side they were getting the response, healthy response to
Yep.
the anger,
Yep.
and the other one they weren't.
Exactly.
And eventually that became a situation where they attacked the other parent in healthy responses.
Yes.
I'm still not clear on how that dynamic happened. Is there something in that the child just started to assume the unhealthy response?
Okay, it's a very good question. Let me just throw in a few things to kind of add to the pot. What I tell clients all the time is, if you've been an addict, your children now love you and hate you at the same time. So they respect you but have a resentment towards you. And so some days the anger comes out, some days the love comes out. But within your child there's an unresolved tension. And some of it's fed by fear, some of it's fed by, are you gonna hurt me again? I don't think I can trust you yet, so I'm gonna lash out at times when I feel insecure and love you at other times.
So the divorce had that abandonment type of trauma there, and so the anger just wasn't.
Yeah, so the other piece around that I think is important is that, so one of the characteristics of complex trauma, it's all or nothing, right? So somebody's perfect or they're the devil. There's no gray, there's no in between. So most kids need a hero. And so if mom and dad divorce, they'll pick one and they're God, they're perfect, and they'll take all their anger out on the other one. And they'll distort the whole picture to make, let's say, mom caused all this, mom's the one that's, if mom was different, none of this would have happened. They need to be able to assign a cause for the broken family. And so they will idolize dad, and mom's the
You know,
scapegoat.
mom was the healthy one,
Yeah.
for the brunt of
They
that.
feel safe.
Yeah.
I think they feel safe.
Yeah,
to-
in their mind, it seems to resolve, because now they can explain that. But what you'll find often in recovery is, as they learn and deal with their stuff, at first they were very resistant to look at their dad honestly, because he's got to remain the hero on the pedestal. But as they heal, they start to see and get honest about what their dad was like and how he contributed to this. And sometimes you get a complete reversal. Now mom's the hero, dad's the devil. It's really an interesting thing. Others, because they're still in that all or nothing, others are able to start to go into both contributed and I can live in the gray and I can't figure it all out, but at least I can be honest about it. But that's a very common thing when it comes to anger at parents. Okay?
I provide services of supervision for divorced parents, court involvement. And I find to my surprise that kids, even age 5, mostly between 5 and 9, often will make up stories about the visiting parents. And my sense is that they live with one parent, they're already triggered in their feeling unsafe, and they have loyalty issues, they want to stick to one parent.
Yes.
And if that parent expresses being negative about
The other parent?
then the child will make up stories. And
Exactly.
it costs like $40,000 in court to clear up some of
Exactly.
these allegations.
Yeah, and that's, again, very common. And another factor with that is that some kids, their way of coping with their trauma was creating a fantasy world. And so now they gotta populate that fantasy world, and so one of the parents gets in that world, and then movie stars, etc. So that can feed that putting one parent on a pedestal as well.
Why do they feel it has to be all or nothing?
All or nothing, because
Ray is anxious.
yeah, so if I know you're totally good or you're totally bad, then I know you're not gonna hurt me, because if you're totally bad, I want nothing to do with you. If you're totally good, I'm gonna talk to you. But if you got a bit of good and bad in you, what, you might surprise me and hurt me. So you need a very black and white world in order to survive. And so that's where a lot of clients, when they go into a treatment center, they immediately pigeonhole every staff person as being good or bad, other clients as being trustworthy or not, and it's all or nothing. And that's, again, very limbic brain. So a child needs a black and white world to feel safe, but part of growth as an adult is it's not your external world that has to be black and white. You create safety within your internal world, but a child always needs the external black and white. So rigid thinking, everything has to be perfect.
So then when we're doing the training starting in January, our clients and people are gonna look at us doing the training and decipher if we're,
Yes. Yeah. So what they'll do first is, number 1, check their vibes around you. Number 2, they'll listen to you and watch you to see if you're safe. 3, they'll listen to you to see if you're talking out of your head or your heart. So do you really know this stuff? And if they have one run-in with you, where you say no to them or whatever, then you can just, and they want nothing to do. So what becomes really important at that point is that for the first time in their life, they try to resolve a relationship problem. Because usually in the past, it's one strike, you're out, I'm gone. And so the ones that come back and say, can I talk about this? This is what you did, this hurt. That's huge. And it can lead to so much growth, because for the first time they're confronting instead of just running from because of that extreme. Yeah. But sometimes you'll overhear clients that don't think you're listening, talking about the staff and each their perceptions, and a lot of that happens.
Oh, that's so true, because even listening to people in different mods
Exactly.
and their perceptions of staff
Yeah.
in there and stuff is black or white,
Yeah.
boom,
Exactly. Yeah.
like with a line.
Yeah.
Great thought.
So one of the things I look for as a growth sign indicator is, are they moving more to accepting a gray world? Or do they still have to have everything black or white?
That's good.
Yeah.
The children have issues going to a stranger,
Yes.
but if the stranger talks to the mother and the mother is positive to the
Exactly.
stranger, then the children
Exactly.
will trust. So I'm thinking maybe staff can do that for
Well,
each
and that's,
other.
exactly, so most clients that, we all get scrutinized, but once they see we're genuine, once we see we're safe and we know what we're talking about, they will respect us, and their respect will go up. And then they will take their cues from us about how to handle different things. So again, very much you're back into being a parent, whether you're aware of it or not. So you have these children that are looking now at you as the one that they're gonna learn from, not just what you say, but what you do. Yeah. We had somebody that got very angry and started yelling. And it was funny because every client stopped and watched me, because they wanted to see how I'd respond. And so then when they saw how I responded and it all got resolved, they learned so much from that, because they'd never seen it before.
What did you do?
I didn't try to get right in confrontive. I just calmed them down and then took them so I could talk privately. Because what they were expecting was, I'm gonna yell at them, I'm gonna be this authority figure and you're bad for doing that. And so for them to realize that, wow, there's other ways of resolving is huge. Yeah. One of the questions I usually ask at the beginning of the anger is, how many of you are afraid of an angry person? And almost consistently, 99% put their hands up. And so what they realize is that their fear of angry people makes them easily manipulated by anger.
That reminds me of a story that my nephew, got into a bit of trouble after his dad suddenly passed away. And he was stealing money from my dad on his, like a big jar of coins and stuff, and my dad caught him. And he goes, like my dad, like he was like quite, long-term, very loud and obnoxious. I'm like, oh, yeah, put that back. And he's like cowering, like he's gonna hit him. And then he stopped, and my dad's like, what are you doing? He goes, well, aren't you gonna hit me? Like I think his trauma from his childhood, like he just expected to get beat on. And my dad's like, no, you're my, grandchild. You're just not welcome in the house until you can prove to me that you can, respect my stuff. So it was like shocking to him.
Exactly.
So it is important.
Exactly. Yeah. Maggie, you
I was gonna say that in the art class, this was about a year ago, I guess, there was, and I don't often keep people out, it's very open, it's an open door. There was somebody that was way out of line, making some real bad racial comments, and it was, and his mental health was very unstable. So, anyway, I didn't realize, the whole class stopped, was quiet, and completely watched how I was gonna deal with this situation. And I kind of very calmly took him to the door and I came out. I was it was very like heart was pounding and everything, but I asked him to leave, and I never kicked anybody out of the art class, but I asked him to leave, told him he was welcome back if he was gonna be okay. He was like cursing and being angry, and I got him out, and I came back, the whole class was just watching, like children, right, almost, and then 2 weeks later, the guy came to the door, can I please come back in? And I said, yes, and the whole class had stopped and was watching again.
Yes.
And it very interesting that you say that, yeah.
Let me go with that, just to say what I do with people is I get them to do their anger ladder. And so it would go like this. When anger is starting to build, how does it show itself? So you might raise your voice a little bit, get very intense. And then if nothing happens, the other person doesn't hear you or respond, then where does your anger go? So it goes up and up, it goes up or wrong. Okay? Anybody got any suggestions of where it might go from a raised voice?
Swearing.
Okay, swearing, and that's a common one. You start to use curse language. Some people then, if it's still not dealt with, they go to throwing things, hitting things, stomping, okay? And then they keep going, and I go, okay, what would be, if nothing else has worked, what would be the final thing? So that can be either physical abuse or disrespect. So I've been respectful, respectful, respectful. Now I am going to call you down, call you every name in the book that I can think that would hurt you. So disrespect becomes kind of where you take anger as it increases. And so when we get into the relationship and conflict week, I ask clients, how many of you have made a commitment to treat each other with respect? They go, yes. When's the one time you break your own rules? When I'm angry. And that's when it comes out. And that's what then causes a lot of shame, especially when they say stuff to their kids or their partner that they know just cut them to the core. Okay. So this whole volcano thing is really, I found, a helpful tool for people to begin to realize that their anger really has two parts. And it's not until they start getting rid of lava that they can actually stop getting rid of eruptions. So dealing with the underlying anger that's been there for years and the causes is dealing with the lava. What we're going to look at a bit later is, for many people, they then have to realize how they continue to feed the lava. So we become our own worst enemies. And so the things that cause lava to increase become very important. Okay, so what I want to do before our next break is, I like to say anger is expressed in 4 ways. Okay, so number 1 is the exploder. So that's the yeller, screamer, throw stuff, hit stuff. And for most people, when they think of anger, that's what they think is an angry person. So their whole definition of anger is you explode. And so they go, because I don't explode, then I don't have any anger. So I don't have an anger issue. But that's only the first one, and that's the obvious one. Then you get the stuffer. And they just work hard to stuff. And then they walk around and say, I don't have any anger issues. Meanwhile, they got high blood pressure, they can't sleep, all of the health issues that come out of all of that, they don't want to face. And then the third one is the self-punisher, or anger turned inward. So if somebody's upset, it must be my fault, beat myself up, hate myself. And so that can go into the physical harm, cutting, but it can be just what we talked about, those negative thought loops that just put yourself down, disrespect yourself. Now, I always enjoy teaching the 4th one, the underhanded. So underhanded basically is sneaky anger. So I'll give you an example, sarcasm. So you take a jab, but you wrap it in humor. And then the person said, did you mean that? I heard you, oh no, I was just joking. Meanwhile, inside you're going, yes, I got them. So it is anger that's dressed up so it doesn't even look like anger. But it still does the job.
Is that a bit like passive aggressive?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So you could do this as, could you be aggressive, passive, and passive aggressive.
Can you go over the last one on your hand?
Okay, so let me give you a couple examples. Silent treatment. Podium. So you come home from work and you ask your wife, how you doing? One word answers, fine. Anything bugging you? Nope. Seems like something's bugging you. Do you want to talk about it? Nope.
Why, is there a reason I shouldn't?
But here's where it gets really, the skilled person does. They keep giving you one word answers until you get angry. And then they say, you got anger issues, you better get some help. Meanwhile, they just vented all their anger, they've punished you through one word answers. So another underhanded is, just push the other person's button. So I know they hate being late, well, I'm gonna show up 10 minutes late, say the traffic was bad. Nothing was wrong with the traffic, but I'm gonna show up late just to push their button. And then they are gonna get angry, and then I'm gonna blame them. So underhanded is when most people start to realize what underhanded is, they go, wow, now I think I got anger problems. Because I'm subtly using anger through sarcasm, pouting, all of button pushing stuff as part of what I do when I feel hurt. I gotta make you pay. But I'm not gonna explode at you, I'm too good for that.
So you could still have your cortisol levels rising
Exactly.
and just sit there
With a
working.
smile on your face.
That's a self-control master.
Yeah.
I was married to an underhander, and I had grown up in a house of exploders. So like, I didn't get that.
Exactly.
I had no clue how to deal with him,
Yeah.
which is why he's an ex-husband.
Can somebody exemplify all
Oh,
of
yeah.
this?
Yes, so that's where I was going to next.
He had his own company.
So most people will have a pattern. So a lot of people still start by stuffing, then they can go to here, and then here, and if nothing's worked, then they explode.
That's the Canadian way.
Good Canadians do that. We're too polite to start here.
Sorry, you feel that way.
I don't mean this as a racial joke, but it's honestly, like, cultures have different ways to
Yeah.
let it be acceptable, right?
Okay, so let me make a point around that.
It's true.
Just think of somebody from a British home that grows up in a very reserved, and they marry an Italian.
Yeah.
Now the Italian, what's the important thing is the Italian's not mad, he's just passionate. But to their mind, that's they're angry. And you say, you're angry. No, I'm just passionate.
Why are you exploding all the time?
So that can cause a lot of confusion because you don't do anger like I grew up with.
When I first got married, it's so funny because my husband was from a very quiet Mennonite family. And I honestly joked that my family was half Italian, half Irish because we just yelled all the time. So when I first got married, my husband's like, why are you yelling at me?
Exactly.
I'm like, I'm not, I'm just talking, you know, like, and so I had to, and then finally after a few months, I, you know, kind of got used to the quietness and then went back to my family and I couldn't believe how coming out of that, I realized, like, oh my gosh, like, right?
That you step outside of the box for a while and then go back in, it's a bit of a shock.
So I think in society, even looking at that, or me, I'll just say me, I look at one as being worse than the other, but are you saying that they're all pretty equal? They're all equal. Okay.
But that's an excellent point because like this can do the greatest physical damage.
Right.
But what I ask clients all the time is, what hurts more, physical abuse or verbal emotional abuse? And verbal emotional abuse hurts way more. And many have had a parent that won't talk to them because they're mad at them. And they've gone for a week without their mom talking to them, giving them the cold shoulder, and it just kills them inside. Because they're so sorry, they're trying to make it right, and mom keeps punishing with silent treatment. So it can do huge damage. They all do damage, but
I don't know, to be honest, I had an exploder parent and an unfriended parent, and I'll tell you that week of silence was fantastic. It was so nice. Really. The dishes flying and smashing and then silence. It was
a bit of a hiatus at the
Until
store.
the next smash.
Okay, so let me just quickly wrap this up with this. So we usually have what we call the cycle of abuse, right? But what I want you to see is that's really the cycle of unresolved anger. So what happens in a child who is angry but there's no way to resolve that anger, okay? So what happens to a child who's got lava building but no way to get rid of it? So there's the elements around that. You have the explosion or the anger episode. And in many families, that was followed by remorse and then a honeymoon. So everybody's on their best behavior. Everybody's wanting to make up for the anger and the hurt that they've done. So there's guilt gifts that they give each other. There's really best foot forward, treat each other with respect. The problem is they're not dealing with problems. So problems are happening, but everybody's afraid to confront the problem because then it might lead to more anger. So let's just stuff all that down because we don't want to have more anger. So the pressure starts to build. And it builds until there's another anger episode. So a couple of things that are important to be aware of. So one thing that can happen is once the child begins to learn this cycle, they go, how do we get, I feel the pressure building, how do we get back to the honeymoon? Let's start pushing buttons. Let's start sabotaging stuff so we'll make this happen more quickly. Okay? Make sense? Okay? Now, the next thing with that is complex trauma is a world of extreme emotions. So everybody's really happy, or everybody's really angry, or really sad. Okay? So complex trauma, you don't have tools when you feel it's starting to go down to turn it around. The only tool you have is let's make it really bad. And then it will be the honeymoon again. So the only tool for resolving a downward thing is to create chaos and to create a crisis. But what you find is you have to start creating greater and greater and greater crises to try to get back to the same honeymoon. And so if you look at a healthy relationship, it's kind of like this. You deal with stuff, it's great. You deal with this, you resolve it so it goes better. When a complex trauma person starts to heal and get in a relationship, and this is what it's like, what does that feel like to them? It feels not natural, but it feels boring. And so there's still a tendency to say, this is boring, let's create a crisis so we can get a really high honeymoon. And so there's that tool still in the toolkit. Okay?
Looking at that as a parent, I learned adopting kids and having to learn attachment. I learned that after a crisis, they are in the most teachable mind. So when they kept repeating something and creating another crisis, I learned to think, I'll wait for this to end,
Right.
and I'll go and do something that makes a difference. Because in the beginning, when they had a crisis, I would give them time.
Right.
It's the wrong thing to do,
Exactly.
because they unloaded all that anger, now they can hear.
Exactly. And that's the right response to a crisis. The problem in complex trauma is, once you get this, it's make-up sex. That's how you get everybody liking each other again and feeling good. Kiss and make up. You don't teach anything. You don't learn how could we prevent this the next time. It's just, okay, we're all happy again, it's all over and done, let's move on. And nothing's been resolved. Okay, so then what happens is, every time you go through the cycle, it gets shorter. So originally it would be 6 months between angers, then it's 3 months, then it's 2 months, 1 month, one week. And with that, the honeymoon gets shorter and shorter. So everything starts to get shorter. Next thing is the anger gets more intense. So your explosions get bigger. So it might start with verbal abuse and then it goes to throwing things, hitting things, but it's building in how it is expressed. And then the third thing is, every time a person goes through this, the damage done in the explosion, so calling names, calling you down, makes your shame get worse. So every revolution of the cycle deepens shame. And most of you have lived that. Jim.
Oh, I've done the thing, I recognize and just figured this out this year, but I have stuffed anger down, but I stuffed it down so far, it's completely inaccessible.
Right.
Gone. No cycle, no nothing,
Right.
disappeared.
Right. So let me say a couple things to that. So first, if it was truly just stuffing it and not dealing with it in a healthy way, then it's disappeared to your conscious mind, but there's still something there.
Oh, no, still, definitely, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Are you familiar with the term emotional anorexia? Okay. So physical anorexia is you deny your natural hunger so much that it disappears. And you don't even feel hungry. Emotional anorexia is you stuff an emotion for so long you don't even feel that emotion anymore. And so part of dealing with food anorexia is you have to retrain an appetite because it's been untrained, it's been gone away. And so part of emotional anorexia is you have to retrain feeling. And that's a journey. Okay, let's take another break.
Too much energy.
Oh, yeah, that must be part of the dude.
We went for an hour walking there, and I was fine, except in British Columbia, you have hills. We don't have those in Winnipeg, right? So by the time I got home, I was just limping because the uphill was pushing my bones against each other.
One on both.
Yeah, I know.
They had to go, I had that, and what they did is they straightened the leg.
Yeah, I'm getting surgery. They're gonna replace part of it, so it's not rubbing.
Yeah, they straightened the leg out.
Yes, straighten it out, so I was going to. Oh, don't tell me that, oh.
Yeah, because the bone has to heal, right?
Yeah.
It was a long.
12 weeks in bed.
Not nowadays, how long
We
was
did
that?
not. Oops.
Addicts, and therefore why phase one is designed the way it is. So if you, I use the illustration that if you have a person sitting in detox, for many addicts sitting in detox, they will say, the reason my marriage is falling apart is because of my using. In other words, the drugs are the only problem. If I can get rid of the drugs, everything in my life will be good, okay? So that's a very common thing, but it's a very erroneous way of thinking because it's not accurate. And so what we do in phase 1 is we start with the brain and we go, okay, here's what's happened to your brain. Maybe the drugs aren't just the only problem. And then we go to anger, because what we want them to see is, I had anger issues before I started using. My anger's actually causing a lot of the problems with my kids. Oh, maybe I had anger issues. And we go to the shame, and then they go, oh yeah, I did all this out of shame. So what we're trying to do is break them from seeing the drugs as the only problem. And so we're going to the most powerful negative emotions that they can see the damage that they've done, so that they begin to realize, okay, I got other issues that I have to be honest about that have caused my problems. And so hopefully by the end of phase 1, they're saying, okay, I have complex trauma. Because most come in and they go, oh, I'm an addict, but don't give me any complex trauma stuff. That's not my problem. And so that's the progression or the logic behind how we design phase 1. Okay, next thing I want to do here is, so a child has experienced anger because life in their family isn't just, honest, etc. But what they're learning within their family is there's other purposes for anger that aren't healthy. But they do accomplish things. So let me give you one. Anger is a great way to manipulate people or to control people. So if there's an angry person and you're afraid of an angry person, you'll do whatever they want, just so they won't get too angry. And so that's where some people develop an ability to intimidate. So anger is a powerful force when it comes to control. And enables you to regain control if you feel out of control. Enables you to control other people so that they do whatever you want because of they're afraid of your anger. Okay? So what we're going to see as we go through this is that what kids have been learning in home growing up is that you can use anger as a weapon or as a shield. So it will protect you, but it will also do damage. So anger medicates. So I'd rather feel anger than grief. So I'll just be angry, then I won't feel all that other painful stuff. Are most of you familiar with the term anger as a secondary emotion? Anybody know why we say that?
Because first I'm hurt.
Exactly. So I ask clients, if you were embarrassed, how long would you stay embarrassed before you turned it into anger? Seconds. So what we do is any painful emotion that we don't want to feel, we quickly turn it into that second emotion of anger. And it makes that first one go away. Okay, so I ask people, what other painful emotions do you immediately turn into anger?
Sadness.
Sadness. Insecurity. Hurt. Shame. Frustration. Yeah.
Feeling insecure, out of control.
Yeah, exactly. Feeling less than, feeling disrespected. So all kinds of emotions, without even realizing it, we've trained ourselves to turn it into anger. So we don't have to feel it any longer. Some people need anger to get energy.
In the house.
Exactly.
I know what you mean.
I'll invite you over to my house
So you will get clients who, when they get up in the morning, they purposely make themselves angry. Because then they got energy to get going, energy to get through the day. So it becomes really their way of providing fuel for the engine. But they're not aware of, that's keeping a lot of cortisol happening, and it's doing a lot of damage within the body. So your whole central nervous system has to carry the weight of all of that anger, and it is extremely exhausting. A tricky one for some people is that their whole identity, their main mask was anger. People respected them because they feared their anger. So that gave them respect, it gave them identity. We had a client who was an enforcer for Hells Angels. So his whole validation, his whole identity was based around being an angry, tough man.
And we say this is part of jail mentality.
Yes. Yeah. He came to my office one day in tears and he says, if I let go of my anger, who am I? I'm afraid I'm going to be weak. I'm afraid I'm going to get hurt. And so that was a crisis point for him because anger, he realized it basically provided all of his needs when it comes to respect and validation and safety. Okay? Other uses of anger. So I'm not just giving them all out.
I remember I used to work for one of the senior partners at one of the professional service firms downtown, and he had this very arrogant, very corrupt. And we'd walk around, I'd follow him because he got out for the students, the students or the yard equipment students, and I'd walk around, I'd follow him, and if he ever got angry at anybody, I would stay behind and start comforting the students. It was my job.
Oh, man.
Clean up the mess.
Clean up the mess. Hold it clean.
Yeah.
I think people use anger sometimes to hide their true feelings of not good enough or
Yeah.
if there is,
So it's a shame compensation for many people? Is that,
not really shameful, but,
okay, well said. So, hide vulnerability.
yes.
So I ask clients, so this is another way you come at it. I go, what is your fear in letting go of your anger? And their fear is I'm going to get hurt again because I'll be weak. So that's another way of, so basically what they're saying here in their mind or the mind of a child is anger serves a very good purpose. Keeps me safe, gives me identity, keeps me from getting hurt. So if I let go of my anger now, a huge fear comes in its place. So now I'm going to lose control. Now somebody's going to hurt me. All of the things they've used anger to prevent. And so be prepared for that. Because what you'll find is everybody usually in recovery with complex trauma hates their anger. They've seen all the damage that it's done. They want to stop being such an angry person, but they don't count on the fact that as soon as they start to give it up, they'll be afraid.
I have one more thing for
Yeah.
When my kids were little and I was still living with my dad, he was very abusive physically. And then when it was like my turn to go out and go to the bars and stuff like that, me and my friends would go. And because I had so much anger with him and the fighting, that I would go and I would start fights with girls that I could beat up. So it's like, and then it leads to number 4, because I was the only white girl on the reserve for 15 years, and a lot of the other women would be like trying to bully me. So then when I go out over town, I'd like fight so many people that then they started saying, like, calling me scrapper, and it was like people respected me. So it was like.
So you gained your reputation through being angry and a fighter.
Yeah, and also got rid of my anger
Sorry.
because I could beat up their dad, but I couldn't do as much there.
Yeah. So that's why when you look at the bullies in school, all of them have a lot of anger. And so when you got anger building, your brain wants to get rid of some of it, so it lashes out. So I'll be a bully, I'll pick on people weaker than me, and that will give me a little bit of gratification or feeling a little better because I can hurt somebody else. Yeah, always gotta find. So it's the angry people in children that gravitate toward weak people in order to bully or abuse them.
I have something else about vulnerability. When I adopted the kids, they could not stand me being vulnerable.
Right.
Even now, they're in their late 20s and 30s, they're all married. If I'm sick or I'm struggling with something, I don't tell them because if I do, they attack me for it.
Right.
They just can't stand it. And that's with the strong attachment figures. They can see vulnerability with other people. They are the best behaved people at church, at work, everywhere. But with me, they act differently because I am their attachment figure. And I'm expecting, when we work with these people who are like recovering children from abuse, we have to keep our voice, our strong position, because if we become vulnerable, it scares them.
So let me qualify that, because to me that there's a big part of that is true. But a child to really develop, they'll grow to a certain place, they need a rock, strong mom, dad, they need that attachment rock. But for them to grow, they need that attachment rock to also be human and to have vulnerability. And so there's a depth of healing in a child that won't take place unless they first see a parent willing to be vulnerable. And that's tricky. So as a counselor, the question becomes self-disclosure. How much do I tell my clients? And that's a tricky thing, and everybody kind of has their own different conclusions on that. Some self-disclosure is fantastic because clients realize, okay, he's been there, he gets it, and they connect to that. Too much self-disclosure, and then they go, it's all about him, sure. Or it brings up a lot of insecurities. So it's a very important thing to be aware of and to navigate. But I've talked to clients, I get many clients say, my daughter's really, really struggling with food or cutting or boys, and I say, tell her about your struggles with food. I couldn't do that, it'll freak her out. And I go, no, I don't think so. I think you're at a point in that relationship where it actually brings healing. And they go home and they do it, and they come back to me and go, wow, we had the most amazing conversation and connection. So do it prematurely, you can do damage, do it at the right time, it's great.
Can I comment on that? Part of the counseling people is that if they see you, what you're talking about being sick, right? That's a momentary thing.
Right.
Whereas if they've seen that you've walked through something, that's sharing of the past, and now you have strength having come through that. Now you're dependable to help lead them through that.
Yeah.
If you're still sharing that, you're struggling with something.
Right.
That can deflate that whole thing.
Exactly.
And leave them questioning whether you really are got a handle.
Yeah, so share your vulnerabilities if you've also dealt with it and resolved it, because then you're not just sharing it and leaving them saying, oh, you're, okay, now I can learn from them and follow them.
I found it's one of those things, and it's tricky to say, I want to share my experience with you, but you're talking about sharing an experience you've had, as opposed to sharing an experience you're having.
That's what I was thinking. It's probably easier to be a volunteer counselor here than to live the kids 24/7.
Yeah.
Because you take a break.
Yeah, exactly.
But when you have them 24/7, and I was a single parent to 4 at once, I had no escape.
Yeah.
My work was my escape.
Exactly. Yeah, well said. And it's so true. So, just 2 things to tie that off. So the children who haven't had attachment, or they had it and it was broken, there's a fear around attaching to anybody again. And so there's always that, is this person safe? Is this person strong enough? Are they gonna be my safe haven and my rock? And so it takes a bit for them, and that fear is really close to the surface if they see any sign of weakness. And that's where somewhat that black, white, all or nothing thing. One of the things you're gonna encounter, I use the term emotional incest. Does anybody know what I mean by that? No. So emotional incest is when a parent, so a single parent, let's say, shares everything with the one child as if that child was a mature adult. So they share in an inappropriate way. And they burden that child with stuff that child should never be burdened with. So now the child feels they have to be the strong one. They have to be the encourager. They have to step up and take care of that mother. So to the parent, it feels so great to be able to share, and you feel, oh, we have such an open relationship and we talk about everything. They don't realize the damage inside the child that's feeling, I gotta be the strong one in this relationship. So it's a very tricky thing. And what I'd say is when people who've done it realize what they've done, it can really bring a lot of guilt. Because then they go, oh, what did I do to my kid? Because now the kid can't be honest about how they're struggling, because they got to be strong for mom. So it's an interesting dynamic. It's a common dynamic in complex trauma, especially in single parent type of situations.
Two things. One is that like making the child your surrogate partner?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, some women even train them to compliment them for their drag.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like
There's expectations
it's
now.
everything except sex.
Yeah.
Sure. And the other piece was just around the parenting thing and telling them too much. I did not tell any of my 4 children that I had been a cutter, that I would gouge, do anything like that of my personal self-hatred, and then they get it by osmosis.
Exactly. Well,
Like,
exactly.
completely by osmosis.
Exactly.
Couldn't believe it. No shock.
They start cutting, yeah. And that's what I was saying the other day, is they pick up our deepest fears and
Amazing.
stuff without us having said anything or never seeing us do anything, but they still pick it up. Yeah.
They feel it, but they don't explain. They can't explain.
Exactly. And so, yeah, if I would say if you had shared some of that journey with your kids, it might have made a difference.
I totally believe that.
Yeah.
Did you say that children who grow up in a home where one parent is chronically ill and that you do have to take on, sort of some of the chores and some of the care of the parent, even if their children, running for this and running for that? Do you think that they would sort of have that same,
Not necessarily, but they'll probably have some complex trauma.
yeah.
So an ill parent is the one type of complex trauma where the parent doesn't want to hurt the kids, but
Yes.
they can't help
Yeah,
it. So it's not an intentional damaging thing. But the kids now live with fear, is my dad gonna die?
okay.
And they're still personalizing, dad seems doesn't even want to listen to me today, dad just seems bored, and they take that on personally. So to me, that it creates within the child the fears of complex trauma. I'll be abandoned, I don't matter, all that. Doesn't necessarily, if they're just doing things with the parent, that's not necessarily emotional incest. But that it can cause them to feel more responsible for mom than they should.
Yeah.
And so there's going to definitely be some issues, and it's a tricky thing to navigate. Okay.
Do you keep reinforcing to the clients too that, this is, I'm sure that some of these issues are gonna come up such deep, like you
Oh, yeah.
always say, like deep shame and oh my goodness, what have I done? And sort of self-loathing of beating yourselves up. So are you continually during the course, like, this is how you coped, this
Exactly.
is, you had no idea.
You were surviving.
This is
Yeah.
you were surviving. So I think that's super important to be able to know that because I think intentional hurt is different than unintentional hurt, you know what I mean?
And I will, on any given week, we would emphasize that
Yeah.
over and over, like almost every day, and sometimes more than once a day. Because, yeah, they get into that dark self-hatred place, and if they stay there very long, it's over. But again, what you have to be prepared for with anger is they want to stop being angry, but it's the regrets they have about the damage they've done. And that's where they can turn all that anger inward, and that's what you gotta be alert to, is when they start doing that. Yeah. Some will have such horrific experiences of dad's anger. So what dad did to them when he was angry, like we've had a girl where dad purposely choked her till she passed out, because when he got angry and she had been basically dead several times, and then like that stuff's starting to get stirred up, and so you got to be aware of just kind of where. So it's not just taking them to an angry place; it's taking them to a very painful, wounded place too. But I think what you're all realizing it with complex trauma, doesn't matter what topic you're on, at some point it's going to get to pain. And, yeah, but the key is, for the child, none of it was ever resolved. So complex trauma is the dilemma of unresolved pain. And so now what we're doing is offering for the first time to resolve pain. And you got to go through it, but we can resolve it. But the fear is that of the child again. I'm in pain, there's no solution, fight, flight. Let's get out of here. And you're going, whoa, 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 just slow down that reaction. Let's walk through this. But then I got to feel it and sit in it for a bit. That's okay. We'll walk with you and we'll help you through it. And once they go through it a couple times and they see that, oh, I made it, I'm still alive, and it actually I grew through this, then it gets easier and easier for them to go through it the next time. So you'll get days where just like you could just feel a heaviness and like just stone silent as clients are, because so much is getting processed internally. And those are the weeks that by Tuesday they're exhausted. Yeah. Okay?
One more thing.
Yeah.
Talking about the emotional anorexia, that some people actually like feel anger in order to try and pull another emotion back out.
Yeah, what I do with clients is this. When they're angry, I say, okay, just stop for a minute. Tell me what else you're feeling. I'm not feeling it, I'm just angry. No, stop and think about it. What else are you feeling? I feel disrespected. Okay, good. Let's go to the disrespect. And so as soon as they see that, the real issue, the anger is not really what's going on here, it's disrespect. Then you got something you can work with and they can grow.
That's what I mean, like someone would get angry in hopes that you're gonna understand, like maybe in blind, their other emotions.
Yeah, and how I would say that, it's like the child who's not understood, so they're in pain, but parents aren't picking up their pain. So they get angry to say, somebody please notice me here, I'm not doing well. So it can be a cry for help for some people. For others, it's a medication. But yeah, always try to find out what's going on below the anger. So important. Okay, just a couple more that I wanted to give here. This is where anger is their weapon. So I will hurt you, and I will use my anger as a way to hurt you. And then 7, it becomes the only way you know to set a boundary. So how do I keep people away from me, from using me, taking advantage of me, interfering in my bubble? And so anger is the way I drive everybody away.
Isn't that a good thing, boundary and stuff?
Yes, but an anger boundary,
Okay.
yeah,
It's the wrong way.
is the wrong way to set a boundary. What usually happens with, so a kid that was never allowed to say no. So now they become a people pleaser, and they let people take advantage of them, and they become a doormat. People walk all over them. And so then this resentment starts building, everybody just wants to use me, et cetera, and then how do I get rid of people? I don't know how to say no to them, so I'll just blow up. Then everybody's afraid of me. But usually what happens then is I feel so guilty for blowing up that I let everybody walk over me again. And so you get that all or nothing, very extreme, a yo-yo, yeah.
So the cycle of abuse you were talking about can be between two individuals, but it also could be against you and a bunch of others.
Exactly, yeah.
Interesting.
So, one of the things that I do, and you can just do this on your own, but I go, who are the objects of your anger, mainly? Who are your main objects of your anger? So, just kind of say them out loud here for me. Parents. Boss. Siblings. So basically what we've got so far is family. Spouse, family.
How about
So-
self?
Okay, getting there. So those closest to us, number one, the ones we have the most intimate relationship with, are usually the most common people we're angry at. Number two, authority figures. So boss, police, CFS, or Child Family Services, parole officer, anybody that's in a position of authority is a recipient of our anger, and that takes you to God. So a lot of people have a lot of anger at God that maybe they never even realized. And then the fourth and maybe the greatest one is self. And what I'm hoping people will realize is to deal with the lava, you gotta start forgiving yourself. So basically, if you live with anger at yourself, which is resentment toward yourself, and don't forgive yourself, you will always have anger boiling away. So that takes people to that self-forgiveness thing, which is a really big topic. And many think I can forgive myself for 95% of stuff, but there's one or two things I can't forgive myself for. And that becomes really their battleground for healing. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, so then what I want you to think of when am I most vulnerable to an anger episode? So you'll have days where you get behind the wheel of your car and you can have a bunch of jerks in front of you, it doesn't even faze you. You're calm. You have other days you want to shoot every single person in front of you that's driving like a jerk.
Why does this happen in the car? What is it about vehicles that
There's
we-
good psychology about this. Usually you're alone, right? Or you're with people that if you're driving, or even if you're just in the vehicle, they can't get out. That's a safe place to unload. You just do it. There's no change in the circumstances. People can't run.
One of
Can't fight.
the growing issues in our culture is road rage. And so it's, for most people, it's in their car that their greatest anger can come out. They just lose it.
I think you're safe in your car. If you're by yourself, you can yell at people and they can't hear you.
Working in the world of teenagers though, so being in the car, you know, they're kind of faceless, you kind of don't know them. But even in the teenage world, it's social media.
Yes.
So it's like their car,
Yeah.
right? Really, you
Oh, yeah.
can be really angry without knowing those people
Exactly.
outside, right? So-
So they're nameless persona. Yeah.
Unfortunately, in the media world, it's not a private thing.
Well, it's not just teenagers too,
It's adults, it's all ages through the media, so, you know.
you could have trolls or something.
What?
trolls, yeah. Troll. Yeah.
Trolls, oh.
So the first three all kind of tie together, but when you're stressed, overwhelmed, or exhausted.
Not sleeping enough.
Exactly. Part of what I want to do with people in this is that is the almost constant condition of a single parent. And so I want them to see that they live in a vulnerable state. And there's no quick fix for it. You have to figure out how to keep all of that together.
It's a depressed parent as well.
Yes, so depression. And with that, most people with anxiety. So anxiety just puts you on edge, your fears trigger, and now you're close to fight all the time. Okay? Other things that make a person vulnerable to anger.
Rejection.
Okay. So, anytime you're living with hurt, or basically other painful emotions, but then what I do with people is, if you're living with physical pain, you're usually much more prone to anger than not. So pain of any kind. So another way to explain all of that is everything that happens to us takes emotional energy to deal with. And so if it's a positive thing, it's positive emotional energy and it regenerates us. But if it's negative, it uses up gasoline. And so we become more run down and we have less resources to handle stuff because we have less gasoline. And so all of these consume or take up emotional energy and leave us in a more fragile, vulnerable state. So what I do with clients at this point is I just use like a scale. So you got a scale and you got your two things on either side. And it's this, for a person to do well, if their pain outweighs their good emotions and it goes on for too long, they're in a really bad headspace. So you have to find a way for positive emotions to more regularly become your norm than what has been present. Or let me give it to a different way.
One more vulnerability I found is when people are by the people they can who have triggered their anger before.
Yes.
It's more likely to get there quicker.
Yes, because you're on edge. Yeah, so it's really connected to triggers from your past. Now this little graph I'm going to draw you is actually to me a very painful thing every time I do it. So this is an emotion world. These are positive emotions and these are negative emotions. Okay? So if you look at a child within a healthy home where there's constant unconditional love, safety, their emotional world is like that. It's mainly positive. This is what complex trauma emotional world looks like.
Opposite.
So basically, you've lived with nothing but mainly pain constantly. So it's very, very different than the way God designed. And so what's happening over here is this is feeding all of that old stuff. And so you can tolerate it for a while, but if you stay down there for too long, it can be lights out very quickly. Okay? Okay, any other things that stand out here? What are some of the things that we do to ourselves to put us in a vulnerable place? So what adds to stress? Procrastination. Unrealistic expectations. So I tell clients, unrealistic expectations is that every driver in Winnipeg will pull over when they see me coming. Works in my mind.
They see it coming, it's that bad. From far away.
They've seen that car before.
Or I tell clients, if as a young father, we had 3 kids under the age of 5, if I got home from work every day and expected Kim to have everything in the house to be neat and supper on the table, I would have been angry every day because that was an unrealistic expectation. So part of what I do in helping clients begin to deal with anger is to train themselves, parent themselves, so when I'm angry, I then go to what's your expectation? Because if you figure out your expectations unrealistic, then now you have the solution to why you're angry. So being aware of what did you expect to happen in that situation?
How do you explain procrastination?
That's a very good question because it's a tricky definition. So if I have a responsibility that I just don't feel like today, I'll do it tomorrow. And I'll do it tomorrow. Now there's times we have to do that and it's not procrastination, it's just I have no more energy today. But if we're fear driven, I don't want to do it because I'm afraid I might fail, I might not do it well enough, so I'll keep putting it off. And what you do is you keep adding more and more and more undone stuff till you're stressed and overwhelmed. And then you're mad at the world.
Like a student who has an assignment
Exactly.
next Monday,
Yeah.
and it's long, and they do it at 3 a.m.
Yeah. Cram it in and mad at everybody that interrupts them. And
Come to class at 5 minutes early.
I don't want to make this about me, I just have like these 3 important things that I've needed to get done for probably, months. They're gonna create some huge ease for me.
right.
And I write out, okay, every day, my Lord, help me today, give me what I need to get this done, and I don't do it.
Right.
So what is wrong with
Okay.
it?
So a couple of things with that. So we procrastinate usually stuff we fear.
I don't know how to do.
That's the second reason, but how, so Kim hates talking on the phone. So if she knows she has to make a phone call, she'll procrastinate. Because she's afraid of something bad happening. And the second one is we don't have the tools. So what I found with a lot of people is people say, I need to go and do this, and in their mind, it's not step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to get there, it's just I gotta do this, and I don't know the steps that make getting there possible. So it just is, it's overwhelming, and it creates a whole bunch of fear, because I don't have the tools to get there.
Just this is stuff around money.
Yes.
Gosh, why would I do this?
Okay, so let me give you a couple more examples of stuff that you will find commonly. People will get letters in the mail saying we're going to cut off your your electricity, your water, whatever. So they can go in a bunch of different directions. They'll read it and they're just afraid and they'll never pay it. Or after a while, they won't even open any envelope that comes in the mail. And it's just like, it doesn't make sense rationally to a person looking on, but to them, it does make sense. Because if I open that letter, I could have a bomb drop on my life, and I don't want that. So it's easier to not look at it. We'll even get clients who will not go to the doctor. They know something's wrong, but they're afraid to go to the doctor because they're afraid what they might find out. So it's easier to sit here not knowing in their mind than to go and find out because it might be too painful. So again, to an outsider, you go, that's weird thinking, but to them, in a fear-based world, that makes a lot of sense. Let's keep, because it's instant gratification. So I'd rather not know than know, because it's less painful. Meanwhile, they can't sleep at night and all of that, and it's getting worse, but they're stuck in the limbic brain.
So it's more comfortable to be in this chaos place
Exactly.
than to be in a place of
It's interesting.
So there's another thing that can be an issue, just to cover. Perfectionism. So a lot of people think unless I can do it perfectly, I'm not gonna do it.
Or it's all or nothing thing.
Exactly.
That's what I,
Exactly.
is that similar to that?
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to
Yeah.
figure out.
And so another variation on that, let's say you wake up and you make up a to-do list for today. So you got 10 items on your to-do list, and you only get 6 done, then you feel like a failure. See, I didn't do whatever, but you were working hard all day, it just wasn't realistic. And so then after a while, you go, I'm gonna make a to-do list today, and I must do all 10, even if I kill myself. And you have to stay up all night. So now you drive yourself to do all of that. And so that then sets up greater tiredness, greater stress, etc. But it's that I have to do all of this. I can't break it into pieces. It's got to all happen. And that, again, that happens a lot. Any other questions around that?
Does it matter of learning grace to solve?
Don?
Could be procrastinating because it's just something that's so boring.
Yes, your least desired. So I do a little thing in my life. Part of, I think, as you teach people how to kind of be responsible and get stuff on their to-do list done, is that some stuff you're not going to enjoy doing. That's part of being an adult. So what you then, what I say to people is this, I've learned 2 things. Number 1, I've learned I have peak times of energy every day. So I'm an early morning person, so if I get up at 5, I get my best work done, okay? If I wait till bedtime, or afternoon, evening, I just can't get around to it. It's easy to procrastinate. So if I have a job I don't like to do, then I gotta do it first thing in the morning, because if I don't do it in the morning, I'm not gonna do it the rest of the day. So what I say is you gotta learn to live with yourself smartly. Figure out your system, your way you're wired, and then just work with that system and you can get a lot of stuff done. But yeah, we procrastinate on the stuff we either don't enjoy or we think is just too hard.
After my car accident, I remained in my mind as industrious as
Yes.
before, but my ability to organize and make things happen was very low because my brain got disaligned left and right, back and front. And that created a lot of frustration.
Yes, very good.
I had to learn from my doctor, if I have energy for 4 hours today, I should only use 2.
Exactly.
And leave, so tomorrow I don't start with 0.
Exactly.
And when I started using that, I actually started producing more.
Yes, very much. Very good.
And I also had, because I was perfectionist before,
Yeah.
but the accident and disabilities kicked me out of there.
Exactly.
Because I had to learn to have grace for myself.
Exactly. So how I say that in a teaching way with clients is that getting older brings with it limitations. So if we used to be able to do X amount because we were high energy and 25 years old, a perfectionist thinks they should still be able to do that today. And part of the frustration of getting older is you can't do what you used to do. And so for many people who were high energy perfectionists as younger people, limitations of getting older are very difficult and they beat themselves up all the time, I should be doing this, I used to be able to, et cetera.
It's called the belief of adaptation.
Yeah.
We believe we can adapt, sometimes even when we can't adapt,
Exactly.
or how quickly.
Exactly, yeah. Okay. Do we need a quick break before, or is it just, you know what? Why don't we go 15 more minutes and then we'll just call it?
But then you
Go to like
say,
2.
one last thing.
My clients constantly joke about one more thing, one more
Yeah,
thing.
last thing.
Okay, the last thing I want to do, and I'll try to keep it the last thing. Part of the self-awareness that people have to develop is what are their early warning signs? That anger's building. So the reality of anger for most people is that there's two options. We can have a trigger and it's an instant nanosecond, 0 to 100 miles an hour, intense anger. Or we can have stuff that slowly builds and with it, we progress and get worse and worse and worse until we eventually blow up. So there can be slow building anger and fast building anger. So I start with the slow building stuff because it's easier to identify some of your early warning signs. So I start with physical warning signs that you're getting angry. What are your physical warning signs?
Clenching.
Tension, often in your shoulders, your neck, or you clench. That kind of muscle tension. What else? Face gets red. You feel your heart beating faster. What else?
Feeling warm.
Yep, you just heat. Okay? Some people get more dogmatic and intense, and they can feel that intensity. Okay? Some people will get starry vision on the periphery. So it's like their vision gets tunnel-like. And some, they will get like sweaty palms, sweaty hands as the heat's building. And for many, physically, they can't sit still. There's an antsiness that begins to happen. The next one is, for many, they can't sleep. If they're angry, they can't sleep very well. Okay, so then that's where I can go next into what's going on in your brain as the early warning signs are happening. So for some, they become obsessed on that issue, the issue that's bugging them. Some are already plotting revenge against the person in their mind, how they're going to hurt them. Some turn it on themselves. I shouldn't be angry. It's not a good Christian. And they turn the anger inward. So that can happen with people. And then some start looking for ways to justify their anger. So make it right to get angry in their mind. Some will go to distorting their anger, say, I'm not mad, I'm just whatever. And they will try to make their anger disappear by explaining it away to themselves. Does that all make sense? Okay? So then I take them to that, what we talked about, what are the other emotions that I'm feeling? So that's just, I want them to begin to see what's going on inside you as anger is building. What are your early warning signs? So how many of you have got up in the morning and you haven't felt angry, in fact you felt in a good mood until the first person you meet? And then all of a sudden you realize, wow, I am angry. Okay? So I've learned what I do every morning, and I do it subconsciously now, is when I wake up, I want to get an inventory of where am I at emotionally. How full is my emotional gas tank? Do I have positive emotions, negative emotions? What's going on internally? And there's a lot of times I don't really have an accurate picture of that. I think I do, but I don't until Kim wakes up. And then she comes into the room, and all of a sudden I get these feelings. I go, okay, that's the accurate picture of what's going on. So if all of a sudden I'm feeling irritable, that to me is, okay, there's something going on here. That's an early warning sign. Another thing for me is, I hope you understand this lingo, when I'm feeling depression or kind of that irritability, my bubble gets bigger. I don't want people in my space as much. So when I'm in a good mood, Kim can sit by me on the couch. When I'm struggling, I don't want her in the same room as I'm in. And when I'm really struggling, I don't want her in the same house I'm in. And my bubble just grows based on where I'm at emotionally. So those are the kind of early warning signs that you can say what's going on here. So look at it this way. Often our anger flare-ups are about the issue in the moment, but they've been building for 3 weeks. And so this incident just happened to be the thing that caused you to lose it. And it might have been only a small thing, and so your anger doesn't really match the amount of the hurt or what happened, but it's been building. And so part of what you're doing is looking for not the early warning signs of the flare-up, but when it's building. What are the things that tell me I'm getting to closer to a flare-up if I don't stop this?
So do you talk about Jesus getting angry and turning over the tables?
Yes, so again, that's healthy anger, and that's what I want people to realize. So Jesus got angry, but he expressed it in a healthy way. And so what I want clients to realize, because they've only had unhealthy, unloving expressions, a healthy expression of anger never violates love. And so they need to learn how to express that anger in a healthy way, because a lot of them still want to go back to anger's bad. So there's 2 pieces then to dealing with anger that I want you to get. There's the in the moment, so we call that grounding when you get that escalation. How do you de-escalate that anger? That's the biggest, most difficult thing to do. Because once that's escalated, you're not rational in your thinking, and you're impulsive in your actions because your cortisol's pumping like crazy. So de-escalating in the moment is very important, so that's grounding. So dialectical behavior therapy was designed around de-escalating and managing emotions for people who weren't very good at it. Anybody have any grounding techniques that help you de-escalate?
Take my shoes off. It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, oftentimes if I'm really stressed out in a situation, and I've done this in a public place, I just take my shoes off.
Good for you.
It's proven that our feet swell when we have cortisol release, and so that's part and part of physiology.
Very good. Tapping is definitely helpful for many people.
Going for a walk.
Going for a walk.
Mindfulness, like doing a little thing I do with my students that actually I'm starting to do.
Exactly.
And then do it till I feel like I'm back. Yeah.
So breathing exercises, letting go as part of that. Some people just kind of do their 5 senses. What am I feeling right now? What am I smelling right now? And they do, that gets them in the now.
Writing is also good. Writing, because it forces you in your...
Exactly. So journaling can help people. So what you're trying to do is develop ways to get you out of the limbic brain to your cortex brain. So where am I? What day is it? Where am I sitting? My feet are on the floor, I can feel it. And you go through just getting your cortex working. Some people go through, what are the capital cities of Canada? what are the hockey teams of the NHL, and they just start doing that. Others, to let go, they do little exercises, metaphorical exercises. They picture themselves holding a remote, and they're holding the volume button, decreasing the volume down. So I'm going to decrease my internal volume. Others picture a stove, and they take something that's boiling and they put it on the back burner. And so it's them kind of visualizing and acting a de-escalation type of thing. So I tell clients, you have to figure out your own. For many people, music is a huge de-escalating tool, but most are aware that music can also escalate them even more. So it's a very tricky thing that they have to figure out. So de-escalation is the first part, the grounding, but then you got those early warning signs, and what you begin to realize is, if I don't keep myself physically, emotionally, spiritually fit, which is what these are, not being fit, physically, emotionally, spiritually, I am more prone to anger. So I need to, on a daily basis, keep myself physically, emotionally, and spiritually fit. So what do I have to do in order to keep myself in a good place? So I always use the example of Kim when I teach this, is so your emotional world takes a whole lot of energy from your gas tank. You need to find ways that put energy back into your gas tank. So I say Kim has a fun tank. And when she has fun, it's putting energy back into her gas tank. I don't have a fun tank, but I have a thinking tank. And so when I'm thinking and figuring stuff out, that's putting energy back into my gas tank. Then I help them see Kim's fun tank is with people. My think tank is alone. So you have to figure out, does being with people put energy in, or does being alone put energy in? So you figure out ways of keeping physically, emotionally, and spiritually fit.
Like when they say introverts and extroverts,
Exactly.
extroverts get energy from being around other
Being
people,
alone.
introverts.
Exactly. Yeah.
So does this take, it's reminding me of when a relapse in addiction. So you have to actually go back to where you had the thought, so it's like clinching the anger now.
Exactly.
Will even be part of a relapse prevention.
Exactly, yeah. So I was gonna just mention that for, one of the things I ask addicts is, how many of you, anger is a relapse trigger? And you will get 99% anger is a relapse. And so what happens in an addict's mind is, you pissed me off, so now I'm gonna go get drunk. And get drunk at you, basically, is I'm gonna hurt you by hurting me. So anger puts you into that fight-flight, which is I'm gonna go get drunk to solve everything, but I'm gonna hurt you in the process. So, yeah, and that's why this early warning signs is so important, because they know once they hit a flare-up, the chances of relapsing are really, really high. So if they don't learn the tools to catch their emotional world early, they're in trouble. And then the next thing they realize is, as that begins to build, there's a line of no return. So once you cross that line, you will pick up. It's just when you pick up. So you have to be aware, like, when am I in super danger mode? When have I crossed that line? And that becomes an important part of their self-awareness. Okay? So, again, what I tell people is, you're not going to figure all of this out in a week or a month. This is a very much, you gradually get to know yourself better, and you gradually get to know your early warning signs, when you're most vulnerable, and you gradually get to know how to replenish your energy tank in healthy ways. Because a lot of people, when they hear self-care, which is what I'm talking about, physical, emotional, spiritual care, when they hear self-care, all they hear is be selfish all day. Sit in front of the TV and do nothing. So what I say to them is, how many of you have spent a day doing nothing, thinking you're doing self-care, and at the end of the day you feel like your soul is starving? And they all open up their hand, because they know that that idle activity or self-indulgent activity didn't replenish their soul. It actually left them more hungry. So it's realizing that healthy self-care is feeding my soul in a healthy way, and that becomes a big part of ongoing mindfulness stuff. Any questions on that? Have any of you heard of EMDR? Okay, any of you used EMDR?
Oh, is that like scratching?
Your eyes moving.
Oh no, I haven't heard of it.
That comes from the idea that when you walk through a neighborhood that you don't know and it's scary, you look left and right a lot.
Yes.
And there is a way of doing therapy by actually teaching people to move their eyes in order to activate some kind of.
It activates different parts of your brain. So why I mention that is it's scientifically, clinically proven that it helps trauma people. So when you're in trauma, all your limbic system has been triggered. So EMDR helps you get back to your thinking brain and helps you process the trauma.
Bilateral stimulation.
Yes.
What does it stand for?
Eye movement desensitization. I always forget the R. Do you remember?
Response.
Somebody can look it up on Google. Jim, you're good
I
at
think
that.
it's actually remission, right? Bring it to remission, bring you back.
No, it's not ringing a bell. What I want you to understand is EMDR doesn't help people who go from in that escalated point. It's more reprocessing. Very good, thank you. So it's the reprocessing your brain circuits. It helps people when you're dealing with them in a counseling thing, when they're starting to feel trauma and they're in that fight-flight place. But if they're triggered and they've gone to 100, it's not great at bringing them back down. It can help for some a bit, but it's not the main purpose of it. That's where they need other grounding techniques. So usually it's, I think, important to realize, because of what we're doing in complex trauma, like every topic goes to pain and heavy, that grounding tool is going to be an important tool for them to apply. And so a lot of people will you can just see them sometimes in class, they'll just put their hands on the side of their chair and start breathing deeply, and now they're kind of de-escalating themselves. And so that becomes one of the most important things for them in the early days, is because that nanosecond escalation, and they know that's their biggest issue for doing something they will later regret. So we try to do a couple days around grounding exercises, practice grounding, different types of grounding, and that becomes an important part for their ongoing, because now they got a tool in their toolbox that helps them de-escalate.
Yeah, I think a big part of the one-to-one counseling piece, in my private practice anyway, is really just dealing with the client and giving them the tools that they need, the particular unique tools that will help their particular unique profile, and then that practicing so that they know that they can access them. So, yeah.
Okay. Everybody's exhausted.
Decision to heal myself.
You're becoming a very good class to work with, so.
We're becoming.
I'll let you know.